assessment model that I use in one of my games modules, but I think I may actually make it the way in which I do assessment in a number of other modules because it's interesting. Um, its intellectual roots go back to Vannevar Bush's famous article in The Atlantic in 1945, um, As We May Think, in which he describes a concept called the memex, which would basically store all human knowledge, or most of it, in some sort of organized way, which could then be accessed mechanically or later. This was pre-digital, of course, but eventually digital. Um, One of the fundamental concepts in his idea for this tool, this memex, which would organize scientific knowledge, was hypertext. The linking of text, the hyperlinking of text. And of course, one of the best examples of the hyperlinking of text is Wikipedia. I mean, all the web is hyperlinked, but Wikipedia, of course, allows you, and this is the Wikipedia article on As We May Think. And it sets some of the context, and it talks about some of the work that Bush did during, for example, the Second World War, and he talks about how it anticipated many of the ideas of the information society. So, of course, we're all familiar with the gift and the problem, which is, of course, that once you get into this hyperlinked text, you can go anywhere. And you can find links which are of, useful or not so much useful value, and you can just spend hours wandering around the hyperlinked information in any old way at all, pursuing one loose thread after another, and even, of course, following links out. And getting back is sometimes difficult. But this is essentially almost the realization of Vannevar Bush's idea of wandering through hyperlinked text, pursuing knowledge. There's another manifestation of this idea which people are maybe more familiar with, which is the idea of fighting fantasy game books, which is a print modality, which has now been reproduced online, which is this idea of branching path adventure games. So in this here, which is a still from, let me do this, a still from a digital version of a fighting fantasy game book, you can see the text is arranged in numbered paragraphs, and each paragraph gives you some description and some choices. And based on which choice you guess, in this case, how much does somebody weigh, you turn to another numbered paragraph. And you follow the numbered paragraphs through until eventually, if you follow the correct route, or a route that leads to a successful conclusion, you will get to an end. So these are some maps, some very simple and theoretical maps of this type of adventure game book, which a lot of people are familiar with, and more complex maps of actual adventure game books. So these are, in their way, a form of hypertext. They're linked nodes of text, and you follow them through various different pathways based on the choices you make, and you reach a conclusion. Right? In the case of the game books, obviously the conclusion is to, successfully complete the adventure. In the case of browsing Wikipedia, well, who knows what the conclusion will be. Theoretically, if you're doing some kind of actual research, you will end up picking out the stuff that's relevant to what you want, or following the links out back to original sources to verify what's there, which is always a good idea when you're wandering around that, right? So that's for context. For practicality, in fact, let me just minimize that one out of the way. For practicality, what I have required people to do for the past number of years in my course on model simulations and games, which is generally a look at gaming culture, is to write an essay in which they capture their vision of the course content, their unique personal view of contemporary gaming culture and the history of gaming, and possibly the future development of gaming and issues in game culture, in a branching path adventure game using a digital tool called Twine. So the earliest ones I did not archive. I do have archives of some of the more recent ones. Some are quite linear. This is a map. This is what it looks like in the Twine editor. This one actually looks quite linear because they've put a switchboard where all the passages lead back to. But it goes through, and this one also has quizzes. So there's the different topics here. And people who are doing the module, at the end of which they will have to produce one of these, are writing every week discussion responses in the online forums to the various readings on these topics. And at the end, they will gather them together and quite possibly edit them to produce nodes in the game, which may be more text heavy than you usually would have, maybe longer than just a paragraph on each of these topics, or the paragraphs may be joined separately. And this one had, these sections here all lead to a quiz, and there are several possible answers. This is towards the end of it, and all of the answers actually lead to the next question, and you step through the quiz, and it will tell you if they're correct or wrong. You see what does an A or G stand for: automated reality, alternative reality, augmented reality, and whether the answer is right or wrong, you're told, and then it goes on to the next question, right? So that's what a completed one looks like. This is a much more complex one. Where does this begin? Where does this introduction? So it begins with the introduction, and it goes to here. When is a game not a game? And it looks at some theories. So there's a discussion here, and the reader, because this is a hypertext, the reader can pursue any pathway they want to through the material. The trick in writing this as an essay is to structure the links so the reader never hits a dead end, and they get through, are guided through, all the points that the writer thinks is important. So it may be that there may be options to read the essay in a way which skips out part of the content if the reader's not interested. And it's legitimate to do that, although it shouldn't be possible for the reader to skip too much of it. And there's different, again, non-traditional gaming, and there's some stuff from Chris Crawford there, and safety in computer games, and outcomes, and it's related to things like emotional needs and Maslow's hierarchy. So this is somebody who's gone in this particular direction and come down to conclusions, and also included references. And if you follow the map, you can probably get through almost all the bits and traverse it, and you can test it and you can play the game, right? Let me go back to home. How does this work? Okay, so I'm asking people to write a very strange sort of an essay as an assessment, but people have been doing it for years, and as you can see, it works. Story. Demo. How many times have I created and deleted this? Who knows? Untitled passage. Double click to enter. So this is start. It was a dark and stormy night. I tested this earlier on by writing a completely different story. STOR. The wind howled. In front of you on a bench, there are 3 bottles of chemicals. They are labeled A, B, and C. Okay, so far. So now what we do next is we want to create some options. Right? So how do we create options in Twine? It's very simple. Mix A and B. We put square brackets around it. Mix B and C. Oops, that's not an option. Sorry, let's do that again. Mix B and C. Okay, that'll do. Right, we could put mix. Messy. Right, we could put another option on it, but that's what we'll do. That's done. Okay, so I'm going to make this go away. Look at that. Because I put mix A and B, as an option in angle brackets. Twine has automatically understood that that is a new block, and it has created a block of text called mix A and B. And what happens? That's always what happens when you mix unlabeled chemicals. So, boom. And now, what did I call that? Hold on, let me just go here. What I want to do actually here is, I want to copy that. I don't trust myself to type these things properly. And I'm going to, there is a fizzing. So I want to change the text in this note a little bit. Boom. Right, so both of these, because the node is now were named the same way, they both lead to this. So this is how you build a branching path adventure game in Twine. If we press play, it opens it in a web page. Dark and stormy night, blah, 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 and we will click, well, let's click B and C because that's slightly a longer path. What happens? There's a fizzling sound and then boom. I haven't actually written anything in boom. I could write some words in there. Go back to this and write. You blew up the lab. Obviously, this is a trivial example. Let's play that again. Mix A and B. Boom, you blew up the lab. Right? Now, here's the interesting thing. Okay, so you can edit the story in Twine. You can say, we will go back here to home. There's my demo. Add it to my library of Twine stories. And I can play it, I can test it, I can publish it to a file. Publish it to a file, it will call it demo.html. I think I better call it demo2. I may already have a demo in the folder. Right, and when I go to, it puts it in downloads. So when I go to demo2, there we go, here's demo2. There's my story. Mix B and C, boom, it works. How does it work? Well, let's look at our, let's have a look at view. What am I looking for here? I'm looking for, here we are, view page source. The truth of it is that a Twine story is in fact a web page. It's a single web page with internal links, right, which you can do. There's a way to do that. A lot of people know how to do that in HTML. People don't often do it within a page, but this is how it works. So it is basically fully HTML5 compliant web markup with some data. This is the effective story. There's some code to make it work, and this in fact is the story, which not only has the story data, but which also, and the content of the story, but which also has the positioning to show where it appears on screen in the Twine editor if you're editing it. And there's some other functions and stuff in there, but as you can see, it's an HTML document, starts with HTML, has a header, has a body, the body ends, the HTML ends. Got a little bit of script to make the magic all work. And that means, of course, that you can do other interesting things with it. You can insert anything that you can put in a web page, an image, an animation, a video if you want to, although it will get quite big, but you can do that. You can also change the styling, because the default styling, where is it, of this story is, we don't have a backlink there. We do have backlinks. It's got backlinks built into it. The default styling obviously is white text on black background and blue hyperlinks, but there are ways in which you can edit that. But the important thing here is that it is very easy to create a story. It is extremely easy to create the links. So mechanically, it's not that difficult. What is conceptually interesting, of course, is how do you choose to structure the essay? This is a different structure: introduction, pick a topic, games and technology, historical games. So this is the same basic stuff, but arranged differently. And the challenge here is to think about how do I arrange this and what are the pathways. Because of course one of the problems when I teach this course is that we must proceed through it over the course of 12 weeks in a linear way. And the topics have to come one after another. But in this mode of writing about it, you're not constrained. And since it's a survey of a very broad and diffuse topic, then presenting an essay where there are a variety of pathways through the material and designing what the pathways you think work best in your mind is, an interesting intellectual challenge. There are other ways, of course, of conveying content. You can use this for more technical content where there might be more limited pathways through the material. And because it's a game engine, there are ways in which, for example, your player, as they progress through the game, can carry inventory or score points if you wanted to do that. So you could build in a self-grading mechanism into it as well. But those are bells and whistles over and above and beyond the basics. And the basics is that it requires you to think about a form of hypertext writing using a tool which is actually quite easy to use. Even though when you say you must write an essay in Twine, sometimes people go, wah, but no, there's no need for the wah. It's quite simple. It's a free tool. You can download it. It runs on everything. The only limitation I have found is that on certain browsers, on the Mac, on Chrome, I think it threw up a problem. But apart from that, in general, if it's not working in one browser, it'll work in another. So that's not usually an issue. And basically, if people send me the HTML file, I can read it and grade it anyway. So it's not a problem with that. And so there you go. So that is how it works. And that is the assessment that people will do for my Model Simulations and Games module this year and every year. And in future years, it is entirely possible. The more I think about this and having proved that people can do this, the more likely it is that I will use this as a form of assessment, as a design exercise, to serve as a form of assessment in a range of other modules. And it's the sort of thing that you could, conceivably, quite possibly, with a piece of paper and a pencil while you were walking along the beach, sit down somewhere and listen to the waves lapping against your feet and sketch out the design of the thing. And then once you get back home, execute it fairly briskly. So that is how this assessment will work and how this tool can be used.